Okay, thanks everyone. Good to be here with you tonight. Over here, it's actually today. It is 12 p.m. over here in New Jersey, near New York in the United States. I'm very glad to be here. I'm sad we can't be together in person. We did bring the AMP Roadshow, our traveling conference about AMP, to Dubai last year. And I planned to go to Pakistan in March before we had to stop all travel for basically the rest of the year. So sorry we can't be there in person, but this is pretty easy though. I don't have to travel over there. You don't have to travel anywhere else. We can all be together. And yes, I see in the chat over there, this is going to be a workshop, Code Labs. So I'll talk for a few minutes, not for too long. We'll be doing some coding together and getting a chance to make our first AMP pages. Yes, in about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, we can make an interactive page with a video embed, with a menu, with all kinds of little features. It should be fun. And hopefully you'll be able to interact with me and talk there in the chat. Feel free to ask questions, to make comments. And as we go along, you'll also get to share your code with the group and show off your creations to the group. So let's get going. This is me, this picture over here, both in the camera and in the slide. I'm a developer advocate at Google. My job there is help the web be faster and more beautiful, better for developers, easier to make fast, beautiful experiences for users who also could use those things. One of our goals is to make it so that people can experience the web well on any kind of device, no matter if it's a slower device, on any connection. And one of those tools we have for this is AMP, which is our topic for today. I also used to do music full time. You can see in the background here, I'm in the attic of my house here. In the background, there are some things that are probably music related. Anyway, but our topic today is not music. Our topic is AMP. This is a workshop version of the entire first course in AMP. We have 3 of these courses on amp.dev, our website. And we can do the first one with taking out most of the details about things pretty quickly. So that's what it is. So the goal over here, I'll do this quickly. Basically, one problem with the web is that it can be too slow. Pages can be unreliable. And if you have if your site's being used by a person on a brand new, amazing device, on a brand new, amazing connection, it's probably going to be okay. But frequently people have devices that are lower powered and are on connections that are not 4G. They may be 3G. A recent stat that I saw was that 40% of connections right now for mobile devices are actually 2G connections. So whether you're in a place where people have great connections or not great connections, there are folks out there who can't really use sites effectively if they aren't fast enough and aren't stable enough. Even for people on better connections, things can be slow. And lots of studies have shown that when sites load faster and are more smooth and don't shift around as they load, people stay on the site for longer, they buy more stuff, they enjoy it more. It's just a more reliable experience. So it matters. A couple of things that matter. You mentioned pages shouldn't load slowly because people hate that. Also, a problem can be your page content is appearing but isn't doing anything because there may be JavaScript that's still loading up and parsing or executing. There may be long tasks going on that keep the browser from doing things on the page or keep event handlers from firing. So you can be on the page there and trying to scroll, hit the menu, do something, nothing happens. This makes users crazy. Another problem is that as pages load on a mobile device, frequently you'll have images popping in, and when the image appears, all the text shifts around. Or worse yet, an ad appears and the text all shifts around. Or even worse, a video ad appears and things shift around. This can happen sometimes 4 or 5 times during loading, especially as I'm at home all the time now, making my own food. Recipe sites, I think, are especially bad at making these pop-ups happen and things appearing, and some sites are pretty much impossible to use. So these are the kinds of things that make the web hard to use and that AMP has aimed to make better. What AMP actually is, essentially, is a few things. The most important thing is that it's like web components. AMP adds tags to HTML that aren't there now. So the web was made about 30 years ago. HTML was there to be a document description language. So there were things like, this is boldface. This is a paragraph. There weren't things in HTML like, this is an interactive menu. This is an image slider. This is a Twitter embed. Those things were not possible back then. HTML didn't include those things. It wasn't designed to include those things. People have added JavaScript over the years to add this functionality to websites, and more JavaScript over the years. JavaScript is wonderful and fun and exciting, but if you have a lot of it, it slows things down. So AMP uses its own JavaScript to power its own web components. What it does is it adds those tags to HTML that aren't there. It adds new tags that add functionality with HTML. AMP's own JavaScript makes these tags work. The JavaScript is kept small and compact. Conversely, AMP discourages you from writing your own JavaScript except for in certain circumstances. This takes some getting used to, but you can write JavaScript in AMP, just it's done in a way that really can't get in the way of the user activity. So if you follow the rules AMP sets out, there are web spiders out there, like Google's especially. Other ones exist also. Microsoft has one, for example, that are looking for valid AMP pages. You don't have to write valid AMP. You can write AMP any way you want to. You can mix it whatever you want to. But if you follow the rules of AMP, then these web spiders will find your page and copy your HTML and place it in AMP caches. And then it gets served from an AMP cache, and it gets served from, say, Google's cache, and it loads extra quickly. One of AMP's big speed advantages is the AMP cache that exists. I can show you what this looks like. You may have seen this before. Are people aware of AMP? Have you ever seen AMP ever on a search engine site like Google Search or Bing? You can comment in the chat there too if you'd like, because we can't speak back and forth, but there is this chat, which I'm watching right now. Have you ever seen AMP before? Have you ever used AMP before to make a site? Let me show you what it looks like. So I'm going to take my browser here and emulate a mobile device. We're going to say, I don't know, one of these devices over here, make this smaller, and we are going to make this visible. Let's go to Google Search, look for something in the news. Why not? How about Dubai? Because we're thinking about Dubai. Actually, it might give us more tourist information, so let's not do that. All right, let's go for like, I don't know, what's in the news? In my country, things like COVID-19 is in the news, so let's look at that. Okay, plenty of things here. So notice these top stories over here. These things have a little decal in the top right, a little lightning bolt. Probably hard to see over there, but all these things here are AMP pages. So right now, to get into this top stories carousel for publishers requires having AMP pages. Now this is changing. Google has announced that Google Search will start allowing any page that's as fast and as reliable as AMP to be in this top stories carousel. That will occur probably early next year sometime. For now, these are all AMP pages. Clicking on one of these things over here, you get to a page very quickly because it's AMP, it loads very fast. In some cases, actually, things will load in the background in an iframe. And then when you click on them, they appear immediately. So even on a very slow connection, they'll appear very fast. You can see this is pretty quick, and things will load in the bottom as we actually, this is pretty fast. That's the idea behind AMP. Basically, you will see these decals elsewhere in Google Search on mobile phones. AMP pages can appear on any device, desktop devices too, but you won't actually see the decal on desktop. If you go to an actual page like this, let's look at an example. Actually, let's go to one of these pages over here. We will see in the console down here, or rather in the elements here in developer tools, if you can see this, oh shoot, I'm looking at the AMP viewer. Let me actually go to the actual AMP page itself. There it is. You see some special things over here in the code, in the HTML. Notice it says HTML AMP. A new attribute is there. AMP version is there. And there are new tags over here you wouldn't usually see. AMP Analytics, that's the AMP's Analytics component. AMP Sidebar, that's the menu that you see over here. AMP Lightbox Gallery, that's a series of images. You click on the images, they appear in lightboxes. So this is kind of how AMP looks in HTML. That's really all it is. Any questions on all of that? I'm going to close this window because it is an example. That is kind of what AMP is. We'll get to use it in like 5 minutes, so we'll get more into it. So AMP tries to improve web performance in various ways. Like we said before, it extends HTML. It adds new tags for new features by web components. JavaScript is restricted to certain kinds of uses. There's an AMP validator you can use to find issues about performance or accessibility. If you have valid AMP, you get into the AMP cache, and then servers will optimize valid AMP pages. And it will try to actually optimize them in various ways. For example, it will apply source set, it will sanitize the HTML, it even compresses your images. It does a lot of things to make your page load more quickly. Here's how AMP looks in real life. This is an AMP component. AMP YouTube, for example, can you guess what this does? That's right, it embeds a YouTube video. So these attributes over here, some of them are standard HTML attributes. Width and height are standard things. AMP really encourages you to use these more than HTML usually does. Valid AMP usually requires having some sort of width and height there. Remember that with AMP, the size of everything is declared in advance. So then when things load up on the screen, they pop into their space that's been reserved for by the browser. Things don't shift around. The browser isn't repainting the screen. It's faster and more efficient. Layout equals responsive. This is the thing AMP does for you. This will actually make the component automatically get smaller as the container gets smaller, and it will get bigger as the container gets bigger. So AMP will make it responsive for you automatically. And the final thing there is data video ID. Again, not a standard HTML attribute, but this is the thing AMP uses, the ID of the video. This is the thing in the URL. There you see YouTube, whatever, $V equals something. That little code there is the ID. So using this tag over here embeds a YouTube video. Questions on that? If you have questions or you have responses, put them in the chat. I'm looking here in the chat. I don't see anything there that's a question so far. Let's keep on going. So AMP is one of the various ways you can make sites. If you use a CMS of some sort, like WordPress or Drupal, you probably aren't doing any programming. You're probably adding plugins to do things. If you're using JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, you're doing it all yourself. You're often finding third-party JavaScript to make things work. Maybe you're using libraries like Bootstrap to make it work, but you're doing it all yourself. AMP is somewhere in between. In AMP, you control the CSS, you control the HTML, but a lot of things are being done for you by AMP. AMP's goal is to make your life easier as a developer, essentially. So for this workshop we're about to start over here, you have to know HTML. We're not going to use any CSS, really. It's already there in the project for you. And we're not going to use any JavaScript except at the very, very end. So let's get started. We're going to use a thing called Glitch today. Glitch is a very handy editor. You may have seen this before. Glitch is an online editor. Now, you can also do this on your own computer. You can use your own IDE. You can use your own web server. If you use Glitch, you can do this all online, and you'll get a URL you can use to share your projects with the group. So first thing we're going to do here is go on our computers and go to glitch.com/tilde-showy-way. I'm already here, and I'm going to stick this in the chat here and ask Omran to stick it in the chat because I can't actually access the chat directly. I'm going to ask him to stick that in the chat at the glitch.com. So go to glitch.com/tilde-showy-way. All Glitch projects have these clever names involving 2 or 3 words. Thank you for that. And you can see over here how your project looks already. We give you some starter code. It's this lovely site about bicycles made from cheese because we all need cheese bicycles these days. You will see somewhere a button that says either remix this or click to remix. Mine looks different than yours because I own this project. Yours may just say something else like click to remix or something else like that. So when you see that button, click that button and you'll get your own copy of the project, which could take a minute here. Usually it's very fast, but its glitch has gotten a little slower. Oh, there it is. That's pretty good. So now I have a new project called Tested Faceted Bobcat. This is my own copy of the code. When this is done, let me know in the chat. Just say, hey, I did it. Or if you can't do it, say, hey, I couldn't do it. Hopefully you have that going over there. So this is how the Glitch editor looks. So it looks like this. You can see a bunch of files over here on the left. We're not going to use the server.js or package.json. Those are for later projects that involve a server and node. Instead, we're going to use two things. One is the assets folder over here. If you look in the assets folder, you'll see a bunch of images you can use in your projects. Clicking on any of these images makes it bigger in a lightbox and lets you actually, thank you for saying you're done there, lets you actually copy the URL as a long, long URL because you share your glitch with everyone else in the world. You copy this, you can then use that in your project. So again, to use an image, you'll click on the image, you'll see a long URL, you'll copy it, and you're done. So then we're going to be using things in the public folder. Actually, just one thing in the public folder. These things are for other projects. Index.html is what we'll be using today. This is your project. You'll see a bunch of HTML here, some header stuff, a bunch of CSS, which is inline, and then you'll see at the very bottom the actual site itself. Any questions on this? Are you there? Have you succeeded in copying this? The CSS is inline because AMP has, for valid AMP, you're required to put CSS inline. That's so that you can, so the browser can load a single file and display the entire page without loading anything else externally. It's for speed. Also, AMP restricts you to 50K. Actually, they've changed it, sorry, to 75K of CSS. So you can't have like 1,000K of CSS. It's supposed to be for speed. In a real project, you'll be building your CSS somewhere else and copying it in here as the last stage. Before we get started, one more thing we can do here, the AMP validator. This is optional. You can do this if you want to. This is pretty useful because it shows you whether there are validation errors in your AMP page or not. So if you want to get the AMP validator, if you're using Chrome, you can go search for AMP validator Chrome. I didn't even spell it right. And you'll see it over here. There's an extension you can install. Again, you don't have to do this, but it can be useful in this project. I'm going to copy this link and stick it over here where it will come to you hopefully pretty quickly. So you can see at the top of my screen over here, I think you can see this. You can see this little gray lightning bolt over here. See this thing? It's way over here in the URL bar. It's gray. That means this is actually not an AMP page. But if you go to an AMP page like amp.dev or documentation site, it will turn green because this is an AMP page. And if there are any errors on the page, it will turn red. And clicking on that will show you any errors that exist. This page has no errors, so yay. But I think this page over here may have an error. This is a local page I have here that uses AMP script, which is the JavaScript component. There's an error here. I don't know if you can see this. Let me click on this, see if you can see it. And nope, you can't see it. It's got a pop-up saying there's an error here. So you can't see it. But if you want to look at it without the validator, you can also just go to DevTools, open that up, open the console, and append to the end of your URL a hash development equals 1. If I use that and reload the page, shoot, did that thing. Hold on. There it is, reload the page. And now we should see here errors in the console. There's our error. The error is because I have a relative URL, which is a problem because if you have your site on the AMP cache and it's a different domain, it's the AMP cache's domain, a relative URL isn't going to work. So there's how this can work. You can either use the validator, you can use this pound development equals 1, or just ignore this altogether and not worry about valid AMP at all. So there's that. What's next over here? Looking at our site a little bit over here, a bit about AMP, you'll notice that a valid AMP page has a lightning bolt over here, or the word AMP. That tells AMP it's an AMP page. A few more things that are here that you'll notice that are common to AMP pages. It requires some things to normalize your site for all browsers. So for example, UTF-8, it requires that encoding. Also next over here, there's this JavaScript. This is the script that basically is AMP's runtime, helps AMP control the page. And then you'll see some more things down here. We're not going to go to these right now. You'll see this boilerplate over here that AMP requires for all valid pages, which essentially will hide the page until AMP's JavaScript has loaded up, and then it can lay out the page, and it can then show what's on there. And then style AMP custom is where you put your own CSS. And then, of course, at the bottom here is actually your actual content. So going on over here, let's think about components. Let's start using components, AMP components. Here's our first simple example of a component. AMP replaces very few HTML tags with its own tags, maybe one or two. One of those is AMP image. It replaces the image tag because it wants to control the way images load. So usually images load, when they load, the browser sees an image tag, it loads the image, and you're all set. But that can be a disadvantage. For example, if you want to have a stable layout, it's good to have a space reserved for the image, have it pop into that space in advance. So AMP actually, with the AMP image, can control when the image loads. When it loads, it reserves space for it, pops into its space, and then you're done. It also allows you to do responsive images automatically. And also has advantages like lazy loading is built into AMP. So if you're looking at a page and there's images that are way down there at the bottom of the page, you haven't scrolled to those images yet, loading those things will slow down the display of things you can see. So AMP waits to load those things until you've scrolled down far enough that you're about to see those things. Lazy loading is the best practice. It's actually now part of the web in general. When AMP was made, it wasn't. So AMP image does various things to improve images. Also, it means that if you're looking at your page in Google search, for example, and you're on the cache, you can preload your page in an iframe, not load images yet until AMP wants you to. Anyway, AMP image, useful for various things. AMP requires it. And our first task, some more components. There's AMP Twitter, similar kind of layout. AMP YouTube we saw before. Anyway, also, before I go on further, certain components do require you to add your own bit of JavaScript to run the component, because the AMP runtime includes JavaScript for certain components, like AMP image, but not all of them, because AMP has a lot of components. If they were all in there, AMP would be a huge runtime and not very fast. So AMP instead has these 8K, 10K, little bits of JavaScript that you load for making certain components work. We'll be using this also during exercises. So our first thing we're going to do here is use AMP image, which will fix our validation error on our site and use our very first AMP component. If you return to your project over here in Glitch, you can show the actual web page itself, either next to it in the same window or a new window. I'll choose a new window because that way I can use the validator. This is actually a site here, an entire site, which I've made, as you can see, and it's got an error here with AMP. If I look in the console and use pound development equals 1, because you can't see my pop-up because it's how Chrome works, you will see this error message over here. The tag image may only be used, blah, blah, blah. Did you mean AMP image? So the problem with this is we actually have an image tag over here. AMP doesn't like that. Our first goal is to replace that with AMP image. So this is going to be your first project, to go ahead and replace that with AMP image. So this is our first thing we're going to do. We're going to change image to AMP image, stick in these attributes. Source already is there. Width should be 640, height should be 480, and then close the AMP image tag. So again, your first project is to replace image with AMP image, keep the source attribute, add width, add height, and then close the AMP image tag. If you're stuck or confused, I've got a good resource for you, which is called amp.dev. This is our documentation site. It's made with AMP, of course. It works on all devices. I mean, any desktop, mobile device, any web-powered device, it works on that. You can always go here and search, for example, for AMP image, and you'll see over here the component on top. And there's a nice handy page with attributes you can use, like source set, other kinds of useful things. And of course, an example over here. So if you're stuck, then go ahead and look at the documentation. But for now, I want you to try doing this on your project. I'll do this too. So I'm going to remove this from my display here and do the project myself as you do it. So let me know when you're done. When you're done, actually, what you can do is stick your glitch URL in the chat, and I can take a look at it. So again, when you're done, put your URL of your glitch there in the chat, and we can all look at your amazing work. Be quiet for a couple of minutes while you do this. Has anyone gotten this working yet? If so, please be brave and put your glitch in the chat there. Okay, I'll break the ice myself. I'll show you my project here. So let's copy this. I'll move these tabs into our display. And you see the validation error no longer exists. My amp thing there is green. So hooray. And what I did was this. I just used amp image, and I used the source attribute, height, and the width. And there it is. Let's show that here on a bigger slide. It's more beautiful. Amp image, source, width, and height, and close it, and that's it. So this is all well and good. There's an image. That's all very nice. But notice, though, that if we go over here to our image and go to our screen, it's cut off. If I look at a bigger device, then it looks just fine. But on a smaller device, it's cut off. So I'm going to change to the responsive view here, and you can watch it here. As we get bigger, it's fine. As we get smaller, it's not responsive. Why is that? We didn't tell it to be responsive. So we're going to make that fix now. Go with me to your project and just add over here one more attribute. Add layout equals responsive. And then your tab will automatically refresh. And is it responsive now? Hey, look at that. There you go. You've now got a responsive image. Congratulations. It's one of the ways where AMP tries to make your life easier as a developer. So going on over here, there it is, layout equals responsive. Okay, there's various ways to do layout here in AMP that we haven't gone over, but you can look at these things yourself later on in documentation. There's fix, which is a fixed size. Actually, let's look over here real quick. If we go on the documentation site, we'll see some examples here. I think there's a nice animation here showing these things. Here it is. AMP layouts. So there's various options here. The fill layout, the element takes the space available to it. It fills the entire container. If it's fixed, then it keeps its size as it is no matter what. So for an image at a certain size, fix is pretty useful because it always will look perfect. Although it can go off the screen, as we've seen. There's fixed height. There's a flexbox thing. There's responsive. There's many options over here. Plus beautiful animations. So next exercise we're going to do here is we're going to embed a video. We saw YouTube before, and we'll do this now. So we're going to use YouTube video. It's our first case with an attribute that's not actually part of HTML. I guess layout was too. It's our first case we have a specific component attribute, like the data video ID that shows the ID of the video. Also, it's going to require using our first JavaScript. So we're going to do is use amp YouTube. So all you need is the ID of the video you want to actually embed, and we'll do it next. So the next thing to do is add amp YouTube to the bottom of your site with this size. This video ID will show a nice cheese bicycle, but you can use any ID you want to, and it requires a script tag. So going over those things in order, amping amp YouTube, The size is the good width and height. Video ID. To add a different ID if you want to, you can always go to a different video. Let's say you have this one over here. This is one of our, what is this? Oh, this is me. All right. So if you go here to the URL, you see it says question mark v equals something. That is, here it is again. That's the ID, this thing over here. So there's that. And also, to get the JavaScript that AMP requires to make this work, you should go here and search on amp.dev for AMP YouTube. Then you will see documentation. Opening this up, you see at the very top, required scripts. If you copy this, that is the script you'll need to make this work. So let's return to the assignment over here. Now try this out. Again, there's the size, data video ID, and there's a layout equals responsive. And don't forget the script tag. If you're stuck, ask questions in the chat or check the documentation. I'll mute for like 2 minutes and you can try this too. Again, when you get this, feel free to add your glitch link there to the chat. I do see a question there. Does it work for mobile application and mobile? It works for anything on the web. So any web-enabled device AMP works on. AMP pages are just web pages, just the usual HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So it works on desktop devices, mobile devices, tablets, whatever has a browser, basically, this works on. I'm not seeing things in the chat, so to be on the safe side, I'll give you 1 more minute before we show the solution. Oh, you got it. Okay, you got it. Feel free to copy your glitch URL into the chat, and I can show it to the group. I'll copy in mine if you want to see what I'm doing here. When that appears, that'll be my glitch URL. It's usually part of the fun is seeing people's projects and seeing what they've done. But here's what I have done over here, such as it is. There's my site. Here, let's make this so we can see more of it here. And there we are, a lovely, lovely video of the famous Parmesan Pacer bicycle being made. That's how it happens, making cheese bicycles. And here's the code behind that. It's just simply on the script up there to run it. And then there's CSS. Here we go. It's pretty simple. Amp YouTube. There's data video ID. Sorry, data video ID. I chose responsive layout, and I chose that width and that height. And in fact, is it actually responsive? It should be. Let's go back to our simulator over here and see if it's responsive. Ooh, there it is. It shrank with the screen. That's kind of neat. That's all just part of AMP. Any questions on that? Here again is the solution. Let's go on a little further then. So again, right, you have to have the JavaScript in there to make this run. Now, finding components. Let's say you want to do something and you don't know if a component for it exists or not. How do you find an AMP component that does what you're looking for? If you're using JavaScript on a site, you'd be looking for third-party libraries or writing it yourself. If you're using WordPress, you'd be looking around for plugins. With AMP, you just find an AMP component, does what you want, and there you are. So for example, there's an image carousel, which is this thing where you get to slide between various images with your fingers or click on buttons to change between images. It's called an image slider, an image carousel. AMP has a component called AMP carousel that does this for you. It's got more features because it's got more ways to be customized. So this requires documentation. You look at the documentation and you think, what does this do? How do I use it? You know, how do I style with CSS? How do I customize it using attributes? You know, does it require a script tag of some sort? All these kinds of things. So let's look at the documentation here for AMP carousel. Return to amp.dev. We'll search for AMP carousel. See a comment there. AMP for beginners. If this is too fast for you or you're not quite getting it, you can go to the course itself and try this again after we're done, or watch with the video and try this again. In fact, I can show you now if you're curious. amp.dev documentation courses. Here's all the same stuff online. There also are videos for all of these online too. We have videos for the whole thing. So this is the beginning course in a nutshell. I will copy this link into the chat in case you want to try this later. And I think there's videos down here too. Yeah, here's all the videos. We did 31 videos with the whole course. So there's many ways to do this. Also, the deck that I have, a version of this deck is available too. If you want to teach this course, you can teach it, click up the courses, and you can actually go to Drive here and download decks or texts or all kinds of useful things. There's a question over here somewhere else, I think. Let's see. You like my job. Thank you. You're very kind. All right. So let's go back over here to AMP carousel. So notice here's our documentation site. Attributes are listed over here. There's new things here like autoplay. There's a delay. These are all ways to customize your slides so that they do what you want them to do. Autoplay means you don't have to actually click on them. They go by themselves. Loop means it goes around from the beginning to the end and it does it again and again and again. There's various forms like slide, for example. That's a slide that's Then looking for something else over here, type. Type is useful. If you choose carousel, then it shows all the slides that you can scroll them horizontally. If you choose slides, it shows one slide at a time. As you swipe between different slides, then it will change from slide to slide. And yes, this is accessible anytime. This is the web. amp.dev is there waiting for you to use if you want to. So that's how you use carousel. And also you'll find up here, as with many of these components, there's a required script you can copy. So now your assignment over here is going to be to make your own carousel. Here's an example of a carousel. See how it looks? It's amp carousel with the usual amp things like width and height. The type we chose was slides in this case. And then the amp carousel's children can be anything. It can be images, it can be video, it can be bits of text. People usually use images. We've done this over here. The amp carousel contains a few amp images, and then you close the carousel. So now, do this yourself. Oh yeah, one more thing, sorry. To find images in Glitch, again, you go to Assets over here, click on an image, and you get the URL. You can then include it in your project. So I want you to now go over here to your site, add a carousel above the YouTube video, make it responsive if you'd like to, choose type slides, although honestly, any type is fine. Make it loop back after the last slide so it never ends. The size of 412 by 309 will look good. Those 3 images there from your project will look good, but any images are really fine. And then after you've done this, again, add the required JavaScript, and there you are. So go ahead and give this a try. I'll mute again, and I'll do this myself and try it out. If you have questions, please ask them at any point. This is your workshop, so your questions are always welcome. I see a few questions here. A good question. How do you change text with picture at the same time? If you had under the AMP carousel a series of divs, each div contained both picture and text, that would probably do it. So you would just have a bunch of divs under the carousel. Each div would contain whatever you wanted to, picture and text, for example, and there you'd be. I'll mute again as I'm working over here on my project. I actually, for fun, just added to my carousel what you asked about. So I have one of the images with a caption beneath it. Does anybody have this yet? Let's give the group one more minute. All right, this group is a little bit shy about showing your glitches, but hopefully you're doing it. And here's mine over here. Well, first of all, here's the solution, I guess. The standard solution for this is just amp carousel. Notice our width and height are there. We chose layout equals responsive. It could be anything. We chose type equals slides, so we can show one slide at a time. We chose a loop. And then inside there, the children of amp carousel are just 3 amp images as you've used before. And there you go. Now in my, hold on, where is this? That is the wrong tab. This is the right tab. There's my version. I actually added there for fun a div in the first one that's actually got an image plus a caption. I made this fixed because when it was responsive, it took up the entire container, including where the paragraph was. So it looked a little funny because the layout's a little bit messed up, but there it is. There's a caption down there in that one, and there's images, and there's our image plus text again. So the amp carousel will take any things you want inside of it and slide those things around as you wish. And then, of course, it also requires, for this to work, the bit of JavaScript in the beginning. Any questions about all of that? We will go on here to the next project. So to find new components, find things you need, you may want to look in the documentation to try to find things you might need. And the reference here lists all AMP's components by categories and alphabetically. If you go back to the actual site over here, amp.dev, you see on the left all these different components, including the strangely named AMP Access Pool, P-O-O-O-L. I think it's a company. What is this thing? Yeah, it's a company called Pool with 3 L's. There's various things, AMP animations. You can make nice animations with AMP. Auto-completion tag over there. An accordion, all kinds of things. Instagram embeds, service workers for your PWA. All kinds of things that are nice you can do with AMP. Actually, the animations in AMP aren't well known, but they can be quite slick. In fact, let's go over here to about use cases. There's 2 really nice looking, I made this site over here, the e-commerce site. That's okay, but more impressive, I think, is this thing over here. This example article. I don't know how it's gonna look over StreamYard. It may not animate well because you'll be seeing my animations here through StreamYard, but this is full of cute animations. As you go up and down this thing, things get bigger and smaller and they move around. These are all AMP animations. What AMP will do with animation is let you use any CSS animation, and it tries to encourage you to use things that are already GPU enabled, so they'll be faster for the browser. Anyway, just an example of the way that AMP can make things look slick if you want to. Does it work with HTML5 and older? Ooh, good question. HTML5 has been around for about 10 years or so. Previous versions of HTML, are those being used by anybody? I don't actually know if they are or not. I think that all browsers now use HTML5. I can say this works on all modern browsers. The AMP team tests all of the components and everything on the last few versions of each browser. So Chrome, Edge, Firefox, Opera, whatever. It also works on older browsers, but they don't guarantee that everything will work exactly. If you use like IE 10 or something, AMP should still work, but you may find some areas where it doesn't quite work exactly right. As I should mention while we're at it over here, no, this doesn't cost any money. AMP is an open source project. Google started AMP, but it's open source. Anybody can take part in AMP and add features to it and become part of the AMP project. There it is on GitHub. Actually, we really encourage people to come contribute because people that work on it now need help making new features. And if you can contribute, you can make AMP better for the whole world. In fact, I'll stick this over here in the chat as well, in case you're a big JavaScript developer and want. Oh, I'm back. Okay, sorry about that. So now that I'm still here, now that I'm back, I'm going to put this link over here in the chat. If you want to get involved in AMP and making AMP better, then please do so. So yeah, this is just a framework like React or Angular or something else. It is free to use. So AMP components, AMP by example is useful also. If you're here and want to see how things work and try some things out, you can. So let's say we're back here at the documentation and we're looking at, say, AMP carousel again and want to actually try it out. You will find over here somewhere a link to what's called the AMP playground. You can try this over here and there should be our carousel appearing there. Normally it would be appearing. Something isn't quite right in this very small version of the screen. But usually you can do this and you can then modify your code over here and see the examples, see your site there on the right. It's possible that it's just too small of a screen to make this work. Let me actually try a different one for fun. Let's see if I can use the AMP Accordion, for example. AMP Accordion, there's an example. Okay, will this work in the playground? There we go. So there's an AMP Accordion. Clicking on the headers makes things appear. I can then change these things over here to something else. Add CSS or something. And then here it is. There we are. Is there demand for AMP skills? I think so. I'm not sure. Oh, hold on. Have I lost my desktop sharing over there? I'm showing you all these things. Oh, I'm sorry. When I got kicked out there, I lost my screen share. Thanks for mentioning that. All right, hold on a second. That was a bad demo because you couldn't see what I was doing. Let's do this again. Okay. My screen is there now. So here's the AMP playground in action. And I just customized this to say, hello, Mina. And there it was. I can change something else. Now that will appear over here. So is there demand for people writing AMP out there? I think so. AMP is used pretty widely across the world. So if you can have these skills, they're pretty useful. It depends who you work for. Not all companies use AMP. A lot of publishers use AMP. Does this cost money? No, this is a free service. This is a public open source project, just like React or other kinds of frameworks like that, and you can use it without paying anything. It's open source. It is free. So anyway, we're going to do a new thing over here. We're going to try to find a new component ourselves and use this component to do something. So we're going to add some social sharing links and find this by ourselves without my help. So we're going to add these beautiful little things at the bottom of our site so people can share our cheese bikes with their friends, as they'll want to do for sure. So now that you're more advanced, you can do this yourself. Go to amp.dev, find the right component, and add a few social sharing links to your site. You can try, for example, email, Tumblr, LinkedIn, Twitter. There's more options. If you use a div around this with class social bar, then our CSS on this project will make it look really nice. It'll give you rounded circles there and all that. And choose the size 44 by 44. So now go ahead and do this, add this to your site. I'll mute again for a few minutes. If you have questions, please ask the questions. If you want to share your glitch, please do so. I see a question. If you resize the browser page, will that auto-fit the content? If you make things responsive, they will shrink and grow with the page or their container, but the CSS still belongs to you. So it really means you've got to make the CSS in a way that makes it work the way you want it to. The point is, if you make responsive components using layout equals responsive, things will in general resize nicely to fit the page. You're asking about testing. If the question is how you test your glitch, you just use show and show the project in a different window or in a different tab. If that isn't the question, feel free to elaborate there in the chat. Pardon my yogurt over here. It's past lunchtime. If you've gotten this, you can always share your link. If you need a hint, I'll give you a hint. Let's see. If you're looking around here for sharing things, it's not that complicated. Oh, look at this, AMP social share. That is a component you can use. There's your hint. I think that's correct in the chat. Mostly AMP is a way to, it's a way to, right, exactly. It's a way of, it's a thing you add to HTML. It's JavaScript that you add that makes new tags possible in HTML. And it makes things appear more quickly than usual. You have less code. You've got AMP helping you make things look stable, right? You can't subscribe to it. It's a thing that appears on web pages, essentially. It's a way of making web pages. And I will show you now how to do this. Here's the answer. Simply, this div makes them look nice. And then AMP social share is the component. Type tells you what actually will appear, whether it's email, LinkedIn, whatever else. And that's it, really. Let's see if I can show you my example over here. There it is. And now in the bottom are 4 lovely little circles with little icons in them, which will link to various social networks or email. Any questions on all of those things? Yeah, AMP's like a library. It's like a framework or a library. It's a way of making websites, basically. Adding your script always helps. Oh, this is a really good question. Can you add it to WordPress? Yes, you can. Making valid AMP with WordPress may take some work because many WordPress plugins and themes use JavaScript, and valid AMP means you can't have custom JavaScript except for in certain circumstances. Again, this is changing because valid AMP won't be as important pretty soon because Google search will begin to show all kinds of things that are AMP-like, not just AMP pages, in its top stories carousel. But there's a great tool that XWP and Google are working on together, this wonderful plugin, the AMP for WordPress plugin. If you go to amp-wp.org, I know that a lot of sites out there use WordPress. So AMP is well supported on WordPress. What this will do essentially is show you how to take your site. If you add the plugin, it helps you make CSS smaller automatically by taking away CSS that isn't being used, and does a lot of work to make images into AMP images and videos into AMP videos and so on and so forth, and shows you where you have JavaScript you have to replace in some way. Often JavaScript is used for very small things and easy to replace. Actually, I made a video about this too. I made a video where I took a site with someone and converted it to WordPress, and it was pretty easy. We took most of the plugins out. They weren't doing anything. And one menu required some JavaScript. We replaced that with some AMP stuff, and it was just done pretty fast. So try this out. There also are nice links here somewhere to all of these things here, all of these themes that are ready for AMP already. 2012, for example, every one of these 20 whatever main year plugins is now AMP compatible, and other kinds of things. We may be working on a project soon to make it easier to find themes and plugins that are AMP compatible. I think there's a list of more things here, isn't there? View all. These are a few of the themes and plugins that already work with AMP. If your site already exists, again, install the AMP plugin, and then you'll have to do some work to make an valid AMP. And most WordPress sites are pretty simple. They have a lot of code because the code gets added by plugins, but the code doesn't really do that much in most cases. There's often a lot of extra code that isn't being used, extra CSS. So it's nice to use AMP because it makes things load faster. And for some people, it makes them possible to use them, period. There's a lot of plugins here and themes that are AMP compatible. That was a good question. All right, here we are again. More about AMP. I mentioned before that CSS has a limit for valid AMP. I mentioned before that it appears in the style AMP custom over here. Valid AMP. Oh, should we do this over here? Let's go back for a minute. We discussed this before. A valid AMP can be useful. Okay, this is the most advanced thing that we do. This actually is in the intermediate course. So making a menu was kind of the climax of this. Our site currently has no menu. That seems kind of sad because you can't go from page to page, and the site it only has one page, but whatever. Menus are good. So this is going to get us into some more advanced AMP with a little bit of JavaScript, a tiny little bit. So events and actions. You probably know if you use JavaScript that JavaScript there is events and ways of handling events. So remember jQuery is still very popular. jQuery makes it easier to handle events and grab things from the DOM. So for example, if you wanted to have a bit of HTML where you had a div that was a warning, and then you hid that warning when a button was clicked, it could look kind of like this. So there's your div, and then you have a button on click attribute, which contains this JavaScript, the $ for jQuery, $ $warning will grab the ID of warning, and then .hide is a method you can use to automatically just hide that thing. That's, for example, how jQuery would do it. I mention this because AMP looks pretty similar. This is the same thing in AMP. So again, you have an ID like warning there, and you have a button, use the on attribute, and then the actual event itself was on click was the part of the attribute. here is actually part of the thing in quotes. The tap event is one that AMP creates. The tap event combines clicking with a mouse with the idea of tapping with your finger. Any of those events will get handled by tap. So this is a format that means when a tap happens, then find the div whose ID is warning, and then hide it. So this always has the same format. It's the event, a colon, a DOM ID, a dot, and then some sort of action. That's how it looks. There it is, even bigger and flying up from, let's do that again. This is fun. Ooh, that's pretty entertaining. So we're going to actually add a menu to our site using events and actions. And AMP Sidebar is the component usually used for menus because it pops out this thing from the side of your device. It's a very commonly used menu for mobile devices. Sidebar has its own set of actions that it can work with. Let's look here at the documentation, as we often do. You'll need this for this project anyway. Let's go to, there's the search. Let's go to AMP Sidebar. Check that out. Here it is. Any minute now. So Sidebar has various attributes. We've seen these different kinds of things, like in carousel. Here, there's things like side, for example. This tells it to go from the left or right side. There's other kinds of attributes you can use there. Side is pretty useful. And then it also has special events and actions that hopefully are listed here somewhere. Here's some examples. Here we go. Okay, so actions. You can use the open action to open the sidebar, the close action to close it. The toggle goes from open to close and back. Here's some examples over here. If you have a hamburger button like this, you could use on tap colon sidebar dot toggle to toggle it open or closed. If you just have sidebar by itself, the default action is open, but open or close will specify opening or closing. So there's that. If you're curious about more events and actions in AMP, you can look again on our lovely site over here. If I can manage to select the text without pressing the wrong button again and again. There. Oh, no, we have cap locks on. I don't like cap lock. There we go. Events, actions. Actions and events, for example. Here's actions and events. There's different events that exist here for components and for global things, like tap is good for any element. Hide and show, and then toggle visibility are good for any element you want. But then other things, other kinds of possibilities. For example, AMP carousel, when you change slides, it fires a slide change event. So you can make it so that when the slide changes, something else happens. AMP list has its own events. AMP selector, AMP sidebar has events also. There's various ways to customize these things. The important thing here is, I don't get the phone right now. The important thing is that AMP sidebar has the open and close events. I see a question over there. Can it be used in production? Yes, it's very secure. It's more secure than most things out there because AMP really discourages your own JavaScript. So JavaScript attacks become very hard to use in AMP because you don't use your own JavaScript except for in very safe ways. So it's especially secure. And AMP's very well tested by a team of people that are pretty smart that test it every day. And there's also some Google security requirements that are put in place to make it even more secure. In fact, here's an example you might like to see. You might know AliExpress, Alibaba, the very large Chinese e-commerce company. A while ago, they made part of their site into AMP. And parts of it are AMP, parts of it aren't AMP. If I go to a mobile device over here, it'll look better because this is the mobile site. Let's go to some sort of mobile phone and load it again. So this is very, very small, isn't it? Let's make it bigger so we can see what we're doing. Let's not go to the app. Let's stay over here. This page here is not AMP. It used to be. It's not anymore. If you go to a page like a men's clothing page, this actually is an AMP page. You see over here the AMP stuff in the console. And all of this is AMP. And it looks like any other e-commerce site. It's just a lot faster than most e-commerce sites are. So that's in production. They're a very large company. And we use this too over here. Again, amp.dev, our site is all made with AMP. We rely on it every day. Are there AMP database servers I can contact? I don't quite understand the question, but I can tell you that AMP is a front-end technology. AMP is used for websites. Instead of using normal HTML, use AMP HTML instead. Your database belongs to you. You can use whatever you want to for your database. The backend still belongs to you. It can be anything you usually use for a backend. Just the front end uses AMP. How to recognize AMP web pages and websites, so you give a trick. Yes, there's two good ways to do it. Easiest way, install the AMP Chrome extension over here, and then if that lightning bolt turns green, that's an AMP site. Way number two, look here at the code, at the HTML. If you see over here that HTML is followed by the word AMP or by a lightning bolt, it's an AMP page. It also is possible to use the components outside of AMP. So you can just use the AMP components all by themselves on other web pages. That usually works, but then you wouldn't have AMP over there. But the components would still work pretty well. They're also working to make the components work independently, so you can, and pretty soon in the near future, add AMP components to any page. For now, the easiest thing to do is look at the lightning bolt there in your extension, or look over here at HTML AMP. Also, in the console, it will say, I think something like powered by, here we go. In the console, it will say powered by AMP HTML. So that lets you know it's AMP. And there you are. Any more questions about AMP? Let's go back over here and do one more thing. So this is going to be our menu. So this is a pretty long task. This is the most advanced thing we do. The last thing we do, it's not that hard once you get it. Once you get it, it looks quite nice and it's pretty easy to do. So the idea is to add a div in the header containing those 3 lines for the hamburger menu. You give the div class navbar trigger, it will look nice that way. And then right below the body, add an AMP sidebar component. It can be anywhere on the page, but if it's below the body, it will look good because AMP sidebar will put a big gray overlay over the whole page when the menu is being shown, and it works best if that AMP sidebar component is a direct child of the body. You give it ID sidebar1 and class sidebar so it looks nice. The sidebar can contain whatever you want to. For this purpose, you can contain a nav element with class nav, so it will look nice, and then make some links under there. Make a usual kind of UL, series of UL unordered list of LI tags. Give the UL tag class label, LI tags class nav item, and finally add to your sidebar a div with an X in it that closes the menu when tapped. So again, to show and to close the menu, use actions and events, as we've discussed already before. Things like sidebar1.open.close and so on. And sidebar can contain your nav with a UL, LI elements, and it's all yours. One more question over here. Routing in AMP. You can do routing in AMP, but it isn't quite the same thing as in other kinds of frameworks because it's not really a JavaScript framework. So routing is more just like actually using links of various sorts. You can also use things on the back end. You can use React and on server side, for example, to do routing of some sort. But it's not quite the same as you're used to routing being in things like React or Angular. It's more like if you're here, then here's a link for this thing over here. You also can change the history of the browser as well with AMP. That's more of an advanced topic. So I'm going to mute again here. I'll do this myself and try this out. And this is our final exercise. By the way, as we're there, please fill out the feedback form over there. Fill out the feedback form, and you'll get in the raffle to win a fabulous Google Home Mini. So I will show you my site over here. Let's see if I have this working. There we go. There it is. There's the menu. Look. Ta-da. So clicking on this 3 lines over here makes the sidebar appear. Clicking on the X makes it vanish. That's the magic there, really. And this is how the code looks. A nice slide. So I use amp sidebar. We use the classical sidebar, so it looks nice. We give it an ID, so we can use it for actions. And no display is required when you first use it because it shouldn't be shown. We chose the left side. And inside the sidebar are 2 things. The first is the close button, which is a little X. And that has this key thing, this tap sidebar 1 toggle. It could have been close, honestly, but we chose toggle because why not? And then it contains the actual navigation links themselves in a standard HTML URL with LIs. And then we have to have this JavaScript here to make it work. We also, we didn't do this here. This also is important. In our header, we added these 3 lines over here in the new div, which is the button. And again, this tap sidebar 1 toggle makes it actually toggle back and forth. And of course, we have the JavaScript over here. And then down here, you see my actual example of amp sidebar. Goes the search over here. There's amp sidebar with the key bits over here on tap sidebar 1 toggle, and also in the header on tap sidebar 1 toggle. Any questions about all of these things here? We'll close by going over really fast some things here from the AMP boilerplate, what some things AMP does, AMP requires per valid AMP, and then if you have sold the survey out, we'll have the raffle. So the AMP boilerplate, you can just copy this from this area over here. This is the boilerplate that AMP pages require to be valid. It's all over there. It has a couple things in it. The first thing over here is this HTML lightning bolt or HTML AMP. And then the stuff over here is required. The meta carousel equals UTF-8 is required. Link rel equals canonical is kind of a thing that AMP has that's from when AMP was first born as a thing for mobile pages. So when AMP was first used, people had a desktop version of the page and an AMP mobile version of the page. So the desktop page wasn't AMP, the mobile version was AMP. And to make sure that search engines knew they were the same page, use this link to link between the AMP version and non-AMP version. Search engines would then know, oh, this actually is one page, not 2 different pages. Index this as one single page. It's still required on all AMP pages. If the page is the only page you have, it was AMP all the time. For all devices, you link it to itself. So I think over here we did this already. I think we have this link here, link canonical. Yeah, it links to itself, although I didn't actually ever update this for the current glitch, but I would if I had the patience to do so. So AMP boilerplate, we discussed before how there's some CSS in there that will hide the page until AMP's JavaScript is loaded up. And then you have to also include JavaScript for AMP itself, the AMP runtime. Let's go through all these things one at a time. Oh yeah, that's how it actually looks. This is the stuff that will hide the page until, until AMP actually is loaded up. This gets taken away actually in certain cases when AMP can be loaded in advance. And you can do that on your own origin as well with AMP Optimizer, a whole other topic. Anyway, that's kind of it there. So we did it. We built this AMP site pretty quickly with no validation errors, with the images, with this AMP carousel, a video, social sharing buttons, and as a bonus, the menu. And that's really it for this over here. To do more stuff, you can keep on adding things in the next courses. Next courses show how to do more elaborate things, how to use events and actions, how to respond to user actions, how to store user information, user data, and all kinds of things. This glitch repo over here has the completed code. You could use a reference if you want to. And that's from a different event entirely. So that's all I have over there. So if you'll share with me, Omran, share with me the names from the survey, I can then add those to the wheel of names, and we'll raffle off, I think, one Google Home Mini. But if you have more questions, please add those questions in the chat or comments or anything else you want to say about anything, really. I'm going to pull up the incredible wheel of names here. This probably is the best part of anything we do here, the GDGs or anything, because it's a wheel of names. So as I get the names of people that have filled the survey out, we'll add those in here, run the spinner, and there it will be. We'll choose a winner, and that rhymes. So go ahead and finish filling out your survey there, and we'll have our raffle. While we're waiting over here, how's the weather where you are? Over here, it's very hot. I think it's supposed to be 87 Fahrenheit today. In the more civilized scale of Celsius, it's around 30 Celsius. It also is very humid. We're still waiting for people to fill out the survey out and to share the names from the survey. Oh. Okay, he emailed it to me. Thousands of records? Oh, I don't know if I actually can do a 1,000-person wheel of names here. Oh, it isn't thousands. Oh, for all sessions. Okay, I think that is all the email addresses here. I think some of those might be there more than once. Well, let's assume they're not duplicates. All right, thank you for doing that. And I'm going to now see if this will all fit in this wheel or not. Wow, okay. This is a very, very busy wheel here. Okay, it's very exciting. Are you ready? We're going to spin. And am I correct? There's one Google Home Mini to give out over here. One Google Home Mini, I think. There's one. Okay. Oh, there's rainy and hot over there. It rained yesterday over here a lot. Am I on the site glitch? Okay, here we go. And click. Wow, it's like a blur. And it looks like it's going to be very close. Ah, okay. All right. You're the winner. Congratulations. I will copy this here and put it in my private chat. And that's that. If you have more stuff to raffle off, we can do one more raffle. I don't know what else you have. But, you know, one is good. You tell me. I guess that's it then. Oh, hold on. One more thing, a swag box. Okay. So we have one box here of swag, a t-shirt, stickers, and a certificate. Should we do that too? Let's remove this person here because I've already won something. All right, one more thing to raffle off. Here we go. This is very exciting again. And I click, we'll do it again. Here we go. There's a blur of email addresses there. We're slowing down, and it looks like, all right. One more winner. Okay, congratulations. Putting this here in the chat. Okay. Anyway, where is the link? One more question. Where is the link for what? The link to wheelofnames.com? The link to Glitch? Well, if you want to find me later on, ask me questions, you can. I am also available on Twitter as Ben Morss, with a BenMorss. Find me here and say hello. All right. Thank you very much for being here. Have a great evening and stay safe. Hope to see you all in person soon when things calm down everywhere. And thanks for joining us today.